Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. This is a wonderful crowd. I'm going to present to you just the Women's National Book Association. I'm not going to do any special little introduction because they've got plenty of things to say for themselves. Feel free to go and grab some more food and drink if you like. We are going to have the authors talk, and then they're going to talk together. We'll have a question and answer, and then afterwards, just to note, we do have books by all of these authors for sale. So if you want to purchase any books afterwards, you can go back to the info desk and get a copy signed by the authors, etc. And also just to note, if anyone needs to use the restroom, just through this door that says exit and make a left, and you'll find one there. But other than that, thank you, everyone, and I'm going to hand it over to Jane Denny.
Thank you very much, Kate. We're really thrilled to be in the Rare Books room at the Strand. It's a beautiful location and perfect for this event with such a prestigious group of authors. We're thrilled to have all of you here. This is our National Reading Group Month celebration, which is a premier event for the Women's National Book Association. And just for a little bit of background for those of you who don't know, the WNBA was founded by a group of 15 women and booksellers who had been excluded from the all-male Booksellers League. They first met in October of 1917 at the Sherwood Bookstore on 19th John Street in downtown New York. 1 month later, when they had their second meeting, 35 women were present. A permanent organization was formed. Its first president, Pauline Sherwood. WNBA's unique characteristic was a membership open to women in all facets of the world of books: publishers, booksellers, librarians, authors, illustrators, agents, book production people. The only criteria being part of the income was that part of their income must come from books. We are really pleased and honored to have all of you here tonight to share in this wonderful celebration. And the only little request I would have is that you become a member if you're not, because it's fabulous. We have an incredible incredible programs coming up this year. And if you need information on our organization, please check out our blog. And just a little pitch for UNICEF. We have a special partnership with UNICEF, and if you're interested in making donation towards that, we'd appreciate it if you would do that. And now I'd like to introduce Roz Reisner, who will be giving you a little bit more information on National Reading Group Month.
Thanks, Jane. Welcome everyone to this National Reading Group Month celebration. This is our 5th celebration of National Reading Group Month. The Women's National Book Association sponsors the NRGM, and all over the country, Women's National Book Association chapters are having events like this one in October. And we're delighted to be at the Strand. This is such a wonderful space to do this program. So as part of our effort to publicize National Reading Group Month, we started something called Great Group Reads, which is a list of books that we are suggesting for book groups. As a former librarian and member of 2 book groups, I know that book groups are always looking for that book to read next. That's going to promote lively discussion, and we're hoping the Great Group Reads list provides years of good reading for book groups. The list of books is chosen by 22 readers this year around the country, all WNBA members. I chair that reading group, and we read like crazy people all spring and summer to put the list together in time for National Reading Group Month in October. The chairperson of National Reading Group Month is Jill Tardif. Unfortunately, Jill has that nasty cold that's going around, and after working a whole day, she had to go home. So I'm sorry she's not here for me to introduce you. She does a tremendous amount of work publicizing the National Reading Group Month. I hope you all picked up a handout with the author bios when you came in and took a look at the literature on the table. The Reading Group Choices book is free for you to take. It'll all still be there when we're done. Before I start, I did want to thank our sponsors, our gold sponsor, HarperCollins Publishers, and all its wonderful imprints, Ingram Content Group and Other Press, our silver sponsors. The Friends of National Reading Group Month are Bloomsbury USA, Red Hen Press, Sony Reader Store, and Sony Style. And the 2012 content partners are the American Library Association, which has been wonderful about publicizing NRGM and Great Group Reads, with Book Group Buzz, one of their blogs, and also Reading Group Choices, which has supplied the book tonight. So we've got 5 really terrific authors, and I'm not going to waste time with introductions since you have the bio handout, and they will tell you something about their books and themselves. Just to say, I've read all the novels, and now you have to read them. They're wonderful. They're really wonderful. All very different in their own way, but wonderful. So I'm going to ask each of them to either read a little bit from their book or talk about their book for a few minutes, and then I have some questions to ask them. And after that, there'll be a Q&A period for all of you to ask questions, and then we'll have some time to socialize. You can buy books, the authors will sign the books, and you can eat more cookies. So, just a question, how many of you are in reading groups? Great, great. Okay, I'm going to start with David Maine, whose novel is An Age of Madness from Red Hen Press. And I'm starting with David because his book is on the Great Group Reads list this year. So we're very happy that he is here. Despite the common belief that all writers now live in Brooklyn, David does not live in Brooklyn, and he came down a great distance to be with us tonight. We were all very surprised that there are writers living in Wyoming and Seattle and all those places. Didn't they get the message? So, David? You can stand up here. Yeah.
Hi, how you doing? Thanks very much for coming out. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we really appreciate your taking the time to come to hear us talk. This is New York. I don't live in New York. I live in Massachusetts. It's not that far away. She makes it sound like, Canada or something. But I don't live in New York. My understanding is that in New York there's a lot of things to do. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what I've heard. And so we're very grateful that you take the time to choose to do this instead of Russian ballet or something that you could be at right now. My book is called An Age of Madness, and it's about a psychiatrist named Regina Moss, who has issues. And it's kind of informed, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I've worked in the mental health field for many years, in group homes as a case manager. I've worked with adolescents. I've worked in Arizona before they cut all the funding out, and I've worked in Massachusetts. And I've observed in my time in that field, sometimes people who provide mental health services themselves are not entirely mentally healthy. An original observation, I'm sure. And that idea just sort of percolated through my warped consciousness for a while, and it came out in the story of this woman. It's about a lot of other things. It's about mothers and daughters and so forth. It started out many years ago. I began it in 1998, so it's taken me a very long time to kind of work through what kind of book I wanted it to be. And it's changed a great deal. But the underlying, the milieu that the character's in has remained the same. I also wanted to say that it's different from some of my other books. My first few books were kind of retellings or reinterpretations of stories from the Bible, which means that the stories that I was working with were already written, and for me the challenge was to take a familiarly known story and make it interesting. And I wanted to do something different. I wanted to write a story that had not been written before, and to see what I could do in terms of twisting the plot and making it engaging in a different way, making it making it more plotty, if that's a word. I don't know if that's a word. I read this fantastic book called Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. You all have to go read this book. And right in the middle of the book, there's the biggest twist I've ever read in my life. In the middle of it, like 300 pages in, and you just drop the book and go, oh my God. And I found that strangely inspiring. I don't think I do the same thing there, but I wanted to write a book in which you're constantly kind of having to reinterpret what you had been reading and what you had been understanding. So that was something I was playing with. I think that's all. I think that's enough. Yeah? All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming.
Alix Schulman is on our panel, and I'm sure her name is familiar to many of the people in the audience. She's the author of Ménage, the book that she'll speak about tonight. However, she wrote Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen, which was published in 1972 and was really quite startling, and has become a feminist classic, and so we're really thrilled to have her here. She also has a new book out, a book newer than Ménage, I guess, or a month older, called A Marriage Agreement and Other Essays, 4 Decades of Feminist Writing. So you may also be interested in that, Alix.
Thank you very much, Roz. It's a pleasure to be here. I second what David said about your coming out on this night, but I also want to thank you for inviting me to this panel. And I really look forward to having an interesting conversation with this interesting group of writers. My new novel, Ménage, is my 5th novel. It's my 14th book, and I always thought of myself as a novelist. But for the last couple of decades, I've been writing memoirs, so Ménage is my return to fiction, really. I always wanted to be a novelist. I thought of myself as a novelist. My first 4 books were novels, and then something happened in my life that required that I write about it. But I didn't want to write it as fiction. I felt I had to write it as a true story. So that was my first memoir. Expected to go back to fiction, but then life happened to me again, and something else had to be written about again as a true story. Wanted to go back to fiction. A 3rd time it happened, and you know, if you live long enough, this will happen to all of you too. Life happens to you. So then I thought, I've got to do something before life hits me again. I've got to get back to fiction, and this time I actually succeeded. So Ménage is a comic novel. It's a satirical novel that makes a lot of fun of the literary establishment in New York. So it's a satire on the literary life here, but it's also a satire on the 1%, on the wealthy. I have 3 protagonists. 2 of them are a couple, a young couple, the McKays. Mac is a very successful real estate developer, and his wife, Heather, is a would-be writer. Actually, she was working on a magazine in New York before he hit it big when they were first married. And then when she got pregnant with their 2nd child, he built a mansion for them on top of a mountain in New Jersey, and they moved there. And that's where we meet them when the novel begins. The 3rd protagonist is Zoltan Barbu, who is a dissident immigrant writer from Eastern Europe, who was fantastically successful with his first book, which was promoted by Susan Sontag herself, who you may remember was always promoting writers from Eastern Europe. And he came to this country. He was run out of his country, and he came to this one. And for the last few years, he's had a massive writer's block. He never was able to reproduce his first success. He's had writer's block. He's always being distracted by women. He's a womanizer. And he's not only down on his writing luck, but he's also about to be evicted and he has no money. So as the book opens, Mac and Zoltan meet. And Mac, of course, is very impressed by not only by his charisma, but by his fame. And after they spend a while together, he invites Zoltan to come home and live with them, him and his wife, on their mountaintop. And that's the setup. All right, well, I won't tell you what happens except to say that I try to explore the lengths that people will go to get what they want. And sex, of course, interferes with the smooth working of everybody's desires. It's a book about desire and ambition, and it was a great bit of fun to write as my return to fiction. Thanks.
And we have Elizabeth Nunes here. I have your character in my head, Anna. And Elizabeth does live in Brooklyn, so she got the message. And she's the author of 8 novels. The most recent is Boundaries. And the previous novel, Anna in Between, has the same character. Boundaries is a sequel to Anna in Between. So, Elizabeth.
This is it. Thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I didn't think of writing a sequel, and I guess my publisher didn't want a sequel either, because my original title was Anna hyphenated, and he said, no, that's going to make people think it's a sequel, and of course it's a sequel. I took a long time and only almost to the deadline to come up with the title Boundaries, and I'm still not happy with it, but the novel does deal with boundaries, and one of the boundaries continues what happened in Anna in Between, and that is the boundary between mother and daughter, mother and adult daughter, which gets worse when you immigrate. Because when you immigrate, you come home, that is, in my case, to Trinidad. In the case of this character, I don't name the island, but you can figure out it's Trinidad. You come home, but it's only, you're not staying long enough to raise any issues at all. But Anna's mother gets breast cancer, and it's on its last stage, and she has told no one. And so that's the first boundary Anna has to deal with, that her mother did not say this. And then, of course, living with her mother as she is recovering from the surgery, they have to confront each other. And yet there are boundaries that you cannot cross, that she's not allowed to cross. So that's one boundary that continues into Anna in Between. And I think I resolved it well enough, because I'll just confess, it's fiction, and a lot of the characters are, I don't know, they don't exist in reality, but I was exploring a relationship I know very well. And actually, I have just finished a memoir, because I felt the need not to confront this in fiction, but to deal with it in real life. And so I just finished that. But in Boundaries, the other boundary that this novel then explores is the boundary of the immigrant in the United States. And that is that one feels always that this is the land of freedom. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. That you can be whatever you want to be. But is that true for immigrants? can an immigrant really be whatever they want to be? Are the doors open for the immigrants? And I'm talking about a documented immigrant, an immigrant who in my case is a naturalized citizen. And I saw in the New York Times this article on, that Michael Ignatieff wrote. Do you know who he is? Yeah, he has, this line stuck out for me and I made it the epigraph. He says, I know quite a bit about expatriation. You always hit a glass ceiling. And I was struck with the similarity in his story and the story I'm writing. And that is, you have to tell me when to stop, because I teach, I'm a teacher. I'm a professor at Hunter, and we talk on. And the students just look at us. They don't dare say anything, or they get a bad grade. So, you know, he was in England with the BBC, and there was a point at which he hit the glass ceiling. He was at Harvard. There was a point at which he hit the glass ceiling. So he said, okay, I'm going to go to Canada and run for prime minister. And he hit a big glass ceiling there because they wanted to know, well, you haven't been here. What, you know, you could say you're a Canadian citizen, but you haven't been here. So I take this question for Anna, and she, in the original, in Anna in Between, is an editor, and I take this through to see what happens to her. Can she rise as high as she wants to go in the publishing industry? Is she going to be stopped because she is not a native, quote-unquote, real American? Is she going to be stopped? And I look at it through the lenses of a particular situation that makes some people uncomfortable. And that is that she heads a small imprint in a publishing company. She's at the top. And the person who threatens her is an African-American publisher. And what he threatens her with is actually, if you happen to listen to CNN, when Piers Morgan was interviewing Toure. Have any of you seen that interview? Do you recall that? Because it's so funny that my novel was finished and then I saw this incident and I said, this is exactly what happened to my character. Do you know that story? Well, Toure is, he's now on MSNBC. He's a fairly young guy. He's a music critic. He's written a bestseller, and he's, you know, an intellectual of sorts. And Piers Morgan is interviewing him. And Toure accuses Piers Morgan of going very soft with Zimmerman's brother. And he says, when you did the interview with Zimmerman's brother, you really treated him with kids' gloves. He was so great, whatever it is. And Piers Morgan has to defend himself. He says, no, I'm a professional. I'm a journalist. And at one point, Toure just sort of leans back and he rears his head and he says, well, how long have you been here? And Piers Morgan says, 7 years. And Toure snorts. You know, he snorts and he says, you don't know the American experience. Well, that's what this novel really asks. That's the question.
We need a second microphone ultimately, Kate? Okay. Okay, great. Just little administrative stuff. The Great Group Reads list is mostly fiction, but we do include memoirs, which are so popular and in many ways are kind of like fiction, have a lot of the same appeal. And so we were thrilled to have Ben Ryder Howe, who's written a wonderful memoir, on the panel. My Korean Deli, Risking It All for a Convenience Store. And it's interesting, you know, there are all these similarities coming up. The fact that Elizabeth is now writing a memoir, that Alix has written memoirs and goes back and forth. We'll explore some of that.
For a long time, I was an editor at the Paris Review, and my boss was George Plimpton. And one time, my wife came into the office because I was interviewing Sam Shepard, and she was about to do to give a lecture, actually here at NYU, and she was a little nervous about it. So she said, George, can you give me any advice on public speaking? And George said, pick one person in the audience and talk to them, which I always thought was going to come off as hostile, like you're staring at this one person in the audience. But then when my book came out, I was pretty nervous about public speaking, and I thought, well, I gotta follow George's advice. So I was wondering if there's anybody here who would volunteer to be the person I will stare at. Okay, thanks. Actually, I'm going to have a hard time maintaining eye contact, so So my book is about how in 2001, my wife and I were, in 2001, we moved into my mother-in-law's house on Staten Island. My wife, Gab, is Korean American, and I'm not. I come from Boston. I went to boarding school, and I was an editor at the time. And Gab, my wife, is a lawyer. And we had the lease on our apartment in Brooklyn had run out, and we decided we were going to stay in my mother-in-law's basement for a few months while we looked around for an apartment or a house to buy or rent. And while we were there, both working in the city, we managed to save up some money, because of course we were living in the basement, and the money grew. And I don't know if any of you have had this experience. This is the only time this has ever happened to me. But I find that if you have a pile of money sitting in front of you, you make very strange decisions. We decided that we were going to buy a convenience store for my mother-in-law, who had. Well, I should just say that I was very excited to be here tonight, given the history of WNBA, because this is really a tribute to women, strong women, overpoweringly strong women like my mother-in-law and my wife, who in this case tricked me into buying a deli, and the idea was the store would we would buy the store, and over the course of a few months it would pay us back, because it would of course be successful. It would in fact make us millionaires, and when that didn't happen, we were forced to work there, and that's what the book is about.
And Marisa de los Santos, who's written Falling Together, is our fifth panelist. Marisa started out as a poet and ended up as a novelist. Maybe she'll tell us how that change came about.
I'm so honored to be here. I see what you're saying, David, about New York City. I live in Wilmington, Delaware, which is kind of the Brooklyn of Delaware, in that I think there are like 3 writers in the city and there are none in the whole rest of the state. I'm exaggerating. But what I feel when I come to this bookstore, which somehow I have never been to, is that I don't know why you would go anywhere else ever. I mean, I want to pitch a tent in this bookstore, and I would live here and forget to eat and drink, and you'd probably find me dead in one of the aisles, but it's just, it's overwhelmingly fabulous. This is my 3rd novel. I did start off as a poet. My first book was actually a collection of poetry. I went to graduate school for an incredibly long time, and it was always to study poetry. I think I wrote my first novel because I had an idea. I mean, my father, God bless him, all along, he's a surgeon, and he would always say to me, it's fine that you're a writer. It wasn't, but he said, it's fine that you're a writer, but could you write something that actually could potentially make you a living? And I would have, but I never had a story. And then I had a character, and then I had a story, and that became my first novel. This is the third, and what I thought I would do is just tell you a little bit about it. Every time I talk about this book, I get in trouble because it's hard to talk about without revealing things that you shouldn't reveal, the ruining surprises in the book. And so, and I will maybe even in my very short little talk ruin a couple small surprises, but you really just have to say something. So this book is about 3 friends, a man and 2 women, who meet in their first week of college. And they become incredibly close almost immediately. It's some form of love at first sight that just deepens and deepens, and almost to the exclusion of other close relationships. They graduate from college, they move to Philadelphia together. They don't all live together, but they all move there together, and for a number of years live there, and their friendship continues much as it was in college. And then, for various reasons that unfold in the book, we get sort of flashbacks to the past. Their friendship just explodes and combusts, and they go their separate directions. And they make this agreement, because they've been so close, that we are an all or nothing proposition. We really can't go from being us to being casual friends, and so they really cut it off. And when the book opens, they haven't seen or spoken or emailed, and they're not supposed to Google, but they all break that rule. They just haven't had any contact in 6 years. It is their 10-year college reunion, and I don't know that any of them has planned to go. Penn sort of emerges, I think, her name's Penelope, emerges as the main character of the book. Her father died 2 years ago. She's sort of still grappling with that. She's a single mother of a 5-year-old, living in Philadelphia with her brother. And she gets a text, an email one day, and it says, it's from Kat, who's the other woman in this trio, and it says, I need you, will you come to the reunion? Unbeknownst to her, Will, the man, has gotten the same email. They show up there and don't find at all what they expect to find. And sort of a series of events unfold, and they end up going on a kind of quest together, a journey that takes them finally very far afield, to the Philippines, which is where my father was born and grew up, and where my parents retired, so they now live there. And the journey it's Will, Penn's daughter, who's 5, Augusta, and Jason, who is Kat's husband, and they go on this journey. And it was such an honor and an intimidating honor to get to write about the Philippines. It was one of the most exciting things to happen to me, I think, as a writer, because it's a place I love and did not expect to get to journey to, even when I started this book. So what I thought I might do, because I can't say too much about the book, is read a little bit, if that's okay with you, from the book. This is during their trip to the Philippines, when they're going to this Balikasag Island, which is a resort island in the Philippines. It's very pristine, beautiful, if you ever have a chance to go there. Little tiny sort of monkey-like creatures that you can see, and it's amazing. So they go there, and this is just a little bit about Penn's reaction. I'm just going to jump through this little bits of this chapter. It was even before she was actually in the ocean, before she was surrounded on every side by streaming, swirling, darting, infinitely varicolored glory. While she was still riding in the snow-white water strider of a boat, delicate outriggers arching over the blue water, that took them from Alona Beach to Balikasag Island, that Penn realized it. Sometimes there is nothing to do but surrender yourself to wonder. You must stop searching for one small, dark-haired woman in a world of small, dark-haired women. You must stop missing your father. You must stop measuring over and over the line between loving and being in love. You must offer yourself whole to the cobalt starfish and the orange one and the pale pink one and the biscuit-colored one with the raised chocolate brown Art Deco design, and to the clear, clear water, and to the sweep of shining sky, and to the silver scattershot of leaping fish, an entire school skipping across the ocean like a stone. She goes snorkeling with her daughter. The first time she jumps in, she's so amazed by what she sees that she almost chokes to death. The second time, more prepared, Penn stayed long enough to understand that the coral reef off Balikasag Island packed more gorgeousness per square centimeter than any other place she had ever been. At the same time that it was exactly like something she had seen on a nature show, it was nothing like something she had seen on a nature show, because everything, from the imperious butterfly fish trailing their scars, to the brown undulating ribbons that Penn assumed were eels, to the neon blue coruscations, so penny small and quick that they might have been tricks of light, each thing, every individual scrap of embodied beauty, was palpably, unmistakably alive. So were Penn and Augusta, alive and in the thick of it. Penn had expected to look down and see fish, and she did. But when she looked to the side, there they were too, suspended next to her face or flowing by in iridescent streams. And when Will swam over to take Augusta to see an anemone clownfish and Penn dove downward, the fish were above her as well. She knew that she was an intruder, but she didn't feel like one. She felt like just another living creature, glowing and streamlined among the corals, corals like ferns and hair and platters and Queen Anne's lace. Later, Jing Jing, he's paddling the boat, Jing Jing paddled them into the deeper, darker waters beyond the steep drop-off in the coral reef wall, and without warning stopped. They all looked at him, and without actually understanding why, Penn was immediately spine-tingling aware of vast movement under the water. "Jackfish," said Jing Jing excitedly, "very good to eat." He pointed, and they all looked down and saw them, under and around the boat, a great circling body of bodies, lithe and flashing platinum, and suddenly the thought that had been skirting the edges of her consciousness since they boarded Pedro's boat at Alona Beach, and probably before that, maybe as soon as they had arrived in the Philippines, hit Penn with the force of an epiphany, knocking the breath out of her. She turned to Will, who sat behind her. One glance at her face, and he was pushing his sunglasses to the top of his head. "What?" he said, resting his hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Penn nodded, struggling to put words to the thought. "Hey," said Will, still worried. She shook her head and smiled to let him know she was all right. "It's nothing," she said, but it wasn't nothing, although she realized it might sound that way. "It's just that all this time, when we were home, driving our cars, drinking coffee." Will leaned closer, trying to understand. "This." Penn gestured toward the ocean around them. She meant the jackfish. She meant all of it. All this time, every second, this.
Okay, so we're going to have to pass the microphone around. No. Yeah, the one down there. Yeah.
Hello?
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to ask about the first pages of your books. The first page is very important, and maybe it's at some point on the story and you've just decided to plunge the reader in at that place, or maybe there's some other reason why you picked that place to start, but that's really where you have to draw the reader in. You have to signal something about voice, about character, about setting, and so it's a big decision. And so I'm curious about how you decided where to start. Anyone?
Well, I have 3 characters. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Perfectly.
And the opening of this book is obviously, I'm required to introduce the 3, but they're not in the same place, so I have to do them one at a time. And I start with Zoltan Barbu because I think even his name is funny, and I want to set the tone as comedy, and also in a page and a half to give a snapshot of a character. I mean, to make him very much who he is. And then the next few pages, I introduce the second character and then the third. So in this particular book, it was just a matter of choosing which one, and I thought the most colorful and unusual. But always, with every book, it's a different task, and sometimes it's a problem. I mean, there's a problem that I've had with some of my books, which is starting over. Starting and then thinking, oh no, that's not where I have to start. I have to start somewhere else. And that is a problem that one can get very stuck on.
Sure. I agree with that. I've had similar experiences having to start over. These questions are always difficult for me, though, because you say something like, how do you decide or whatever? And that implies a certain analytical approach, like that you make a decision. I don't. Something comes into my head and I write it down and I think, yeah, that's kind of cool. And that's about how much thought goes into it. And if it maybe I shouldn't say that, no. I mean, if it works and if it's good, then that's great, and if it doesn't, then it's find something else. The first sentence of this book is, Freud would say, I'm a lousy mother. I don't know where that came from. But it does a couple of things. It introduces Freud, so it sort of touches on the psychological thematic stuff. And it tells you that the narrator's female, which is a useful piece of information right up front when the author's name is Dave. But it's not like I sat down and said, I got to convey that in the first paragraph. It just kind of happens. Does it just kind of happen? Or, yeah? I want to hear from this guy.
I actually did not want to write a memoir. I grew up, and then until I wrote this book, what I really wanted to do was write like David McCullough or John McPhee or George Orwell. That was the kind of nonfiction I wanted to write, and the kind of nothing with the word me in it, But then this experience happened, and we decided that I was gonna write a book about it, and I couldn't say no. So I started trying to figure out, started reading memoirs and trying to figure out, what kind of memoirs I liked, and then from there, what I tried to do was inhabit the voice and the personality and the character of these people and try out different styles. So I started trying to write in the voice of Maya Angelou, and then Dostoevsky, and the guy who wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. And I started to feel really schizophrenic and weird. And it took a long time. It took about a year of just trying out these different voices until one day around 2:30 it just started coming out, and I remember that people I was living with, my mother-in-law and various other relatives, came in and started tapping me on the shoulder because they wanted me to come out of the room or eat or take care of my kids or something, and I just remember people tapping me on the shoulder and just waving them off, and that was when the voice had arrived.
Do you want to, I can, my books, when I start a book, what I really start with is a character who comes to me from, I don't know where, and lives with me for a long time, months. And I just kind of accumulate information, a lot of it very small things like how she butters her toast all the way to the edges of the bread, or what she was for Halloween when she was 10, or the thing her father said to her that she never forgot, or something like that. And a lot of it doesn't show up in the book. But I'm sort of, what those details do for me and once I feel like I know the character well enough, I can set them in motion and sort of see what they do. But it's really, for me, I think as a person who interacts with people and as a writer, and maybe this is how it is for everybody, it's these really small things that can, suddenly you give you a window into who somebody is. And once you have that, you have a handle on them, you know them, and you have an understanding of them. I feel the same way as a reader. So what I wanted to do with my opening, I mean, what I always want to do with pretty much every page of every book, but especially with the opening, is give you a sense of who this person is and give you a little piece of her life and her moving around in this little piece of her life so that you know her. So the way this book begins is with Penn. Penn has this job that I never knew existed until I became a writer, which is that she's an escort, not an escort, but like an author escort. So sometimes when you travel, like you go to Seattle, there's someone who picks you up and someone who drives you around, and they give you a bottle of water, and they're really nice to you, and they take you to your interviews and to all the places you need to be and to your hotel. And so I thought this was not Penn's original plan to be an author escort, but she is one when the book opens. And she's in a bookstore, and she's supposed to be listening to her writer who has a memoir. I don't have a memoir, and I don't think I will have one anytime soon, but she has her writer. This is my connection to everybody else. She's listening to her author who has written a memoir about being a dominatrix. She's no longer a dominatrix, but and it's very interesting, but Penn is very tired because her daughter, Augusta, was sick the night before, and she had to throw away, I'm talking too much, she had to throw away all the cold medicine in her medicine cabinet because the FDA came out with this warning that it could kill children. So she has no resources, and she was up all night with her sick daughter. And she gets the email that is in her smartphone, which is brand new and she doesn't really know how to use. And she gets an email, and it buzzes, and she goes crazy, and she finds this email and thinks, finally she's gotten in touch with me. She realizes that she's really been waiting all this time. But that's how I knew that's where it just started. I have no idea, but that's where it always started from the first day I started writing.
Well, I sometimes feel a bit of a fraud because I teach creative writing, and I know how a novel should begin, and I know what should be in it, and I know, I can tell you this, that you have to be able to get the reader to care for the character, because what's interesting is the character's journey through plot, and I do the whole thing about desire, and I know it all in that way, theoretically. I tend to give my students good examples of that. Canada, who wrote Canada again? Richard Ford. The beginning of that novel is incredible. First there was the murder, then there was the robbery, and so on. It's the 5 first lines of that novel. I don't know to what degree it delivers, but it certainly hits you right there. And I show them that. And today I was doing Macbeth. I said, look how quickly in Act 1, how quickly Shakespeare sets up what it is. So, okay, theoretically I know. Me? What's happening to what I'm waiting for is magic. Because I write with consciousness and not consciousness, my first draft is all flying without wings. So for me, and it's happening to me right now because I am beginning a new novel, it has to be a first line. And it has to have a certain kind of musicality in that line. And that line is going to tell me what person, it's going to tell me what tense, it's going to tell me what tone. And even though I know, and I do know what I want to write about in this novel, I can't write it until that happens. And once that happens, I move along, and it's a joy. There are times when it's not a joy, but I'm not on, because I've had a life as an academic, and have written, scholarly and academic articles for a long time, I know that is so much easier. I don't care what people say, that's so much easier. Because you have an outline, you're grounded, you know where you're going, and you can pick up. But this, so for me, I wait till I hear this happens. And when it sings to me,
That reminds me of the famous line about it's easy to write, you just sit down at the typewriter and open a vein.
yeah.
Before we leave the topic of character, I wanted to ask David how he created that incredible Regina. As a male writer writing about a woman, she just leaps off the page. And just in general, how you get your head into characters that are not like you, that you have to create.
She's my mom. No. She's really not. Yeah, people talk about this. I'm going to cop out again and say, I actually don't think it's that different writing a female first-person narrator and writing a male. I don't know. I mean, I grew up with sisters and my mom, and I know women, and we're all kind of concerned with the same stuff. Yeah, but people do talk about it, and it gets mentioned in reviews and things. So I guess it's unusual. I mean, I do try to approach characters as individuals rather than as representations of class or of age or of gender or of ethnicity or whatever. And if you do that enough, if you can get far enough into a character that you're just talking about Regina, you're not talking about a woman psychiatrist, or you're talking about whoever, Eve, then you can just sort of leave all that behind about, I'm attempting to occupy the consciousness of somebody who's very different from me, and just occupy an individual person's head space, and you're okay. You know what I mean? Because you sit there, oh, she's a woman, I better make a list. She likes cats, okay. It just gets really stupid really, really quickly. I like cats, so okay, scratch that. But, I have had, I don't teach now, but I have taught in the past, and I have had students kind of try to very deliberately write about the other, and sometimes it just kind of makes you cringe, and it is that people sort of grope for the most obvious kind of icons or whatever of whatever it is that they think they're doing. Hey, he's a black guy, he must like basketball, okay. So you try to avoid that, but besides just avoiding it, I think you try to create something by focusing on the unique person rather than the group. Yeah? And then you forget about it. Then you just don't think about it. And you'll be okay. I don't know. I'm copping out again.
I think that in some way, when you look up at the screen as your inspiration comes, you look up and it's the magic that Elizabeth spoke of. Something happens and it gets into your mind and your hand as you write. I think in some sense, characters are based on people that you've known. When I say in some sense, I mean they're different. Sometimes they're very deliberately different. For example, with Zoltan, there was somebody I had in mind, and I had to disguise him so much that Zoltan has nothing to do with him at all. But in my secret inner mind, I know that I can connect to that character, that person, in order to enrich my character. Not in any realistic way, but in some sense of him that I have. And I think that for fiction writers, there are fantasy writers. I don't know. I've never written fantasy, but I do think that in some sense, our characters are connected with people in our lives. And so they're not types, really. And I also want to say that for me, I enjoy writing men more than anything because there's always a satirical edge to when I'm writing male characters.
And Ben, you're not off the hook on this because you had to make choices about the characters in your memoir.
So my mother-in-law was born in Korea. She came from a North Korean family. Her father was put on the gulag in North Korea. They were refugees, and they then obviously left Korea to come to the United States and lived in various parts of the United States that are completely outside my experience. Trailer park in Ohio, Staten Island, and it was the idea of trying to inhabit or portray somebody like my mother-in-law was sort of a writer's nightmare in a way, and especially to try to create a character to try to bring her alive on the page was the kind of thing that would keep me up at night. But I think that if you want to write about somebody, it's because you've fallen in love with something about them that is probably somewhat narcissistically something that you believe in, that you care about, that is a value you share, and there's a leap of faith where you think that you're going to find some way to connect with that person and share that connection and convince other people that connection is real. So there was a moment late in the book when I was still trying to figure out my mother-in-law's story and what made her tick. When I began to realize that there were these rather bizarre things that I shared in common with a woman from basically 19th century Korea. And that's what makes that when you get to that moment, it's the best part of writing.
You can go ahead. I think that's so interesting what you just said, that you found that there was something in common with a 19th century Korean. And I think that that's what we miss. I'm kind of going to be sort of on a soapbox in a way right now, because I was just thinking the other day that the way that Columbus discovered Trinidad, which is where I'm from, we were there, obviously. Well, people were there, obviously. But until Columbus put his lens on us, we didn't exist. We were invisible. And sometimes, I'm going to connect what you're saying. Sometimes I find that when we are reading, unless we can see a character who looks like us, and then this is not a book we're going to read. And for you making that discovery that in writing about this Korean woman, you discovered more about yourself. So sometimes I was thinking lately, I've written 8 novels, and they all got reviewed in the Times, really well reviewed in the Times. And I say, well, how am I going to get discovered, because in a way, I do feel that I remain invisible. And when I ask people, they say it's generally, if they're going to be honest, well, it's not about my life. You're not telling a story about my life. You're not telling a story about, this isn't about me. But I try to say, then you're going to find out more about you. You will find out more about you, because you will see what is I think the essential lesson for all of us to learn is that we are all human beings. And we are all subject to the human condition, to the human flaws, and we all have this time clock in front of us. No matter how rich we are, how poor we are, no matter, I always say it probably is easier for a poor man to face his mortality than a rich man. But the fact is, the mortality is something that we all have in common. So I think, I'm going to get off the soapbox, but yeah. It worries me.
I think that the creation of character is the most mysterious part of it. And when I am, and even that phrase seems very wrong to me, like the creation of character, because when I'm writing or when I'm doing all the work that happens before I write, I don't feel at all, intellectually, of course, I know I'm creating these characters. That's what a writer does. But intuitively and emotionally, what I feel like is happening is that I'm discovering them. And I feel sort of, sometimes I feel sort of like, you know, those archaeologists, I guess, who have little brushes and they're just brushing a little bit of sand and they discover the jawbone or they discover the whatever they discover. And that's my job, is to it's there. This person exists. I'm not making them. I am uncovering who they are in order to be able to write them. And a lot of the time, once I'm into the process, what I'm really feeling, the best way to describe the experience of writing them and their story is what I do I spend a lot of time on is listening and being just kind of tuned in and ready to hear, to understand where I'm supposed to go with them and what their story is. And often the worst thing that happens in writing, and I'm sure everyone experiences this, is that I have a little bit of a plan. I don't plan extensively, but I'll have a plan, and suddenly my characters are not going along with it. And what I try to do is manipulate them and micromanage and push them, like the arc is supposed to go like this. It's not supposed, we're not doing this. What's up with you? You know, this is not, and so then I struggle and write bad, wrong words, and then I have to back off and say, okay, just take a deep breath and listen to what they're telling you, listen to their giving you their story. And I kind of hate how that sounds. It sounds so mystical, and you know, I'm not really that kind of person in many ways, but at some point you just have to hand yourself over to your characters.
I have a lot of questions here, but I want to leave time for the audience, so I'm going to ask you one more question, which is, what does writing mean to you in your life? There was a lovely article by Jhumpa Lahiri in the New York Times, an essay called My Life Sentences, and she wrote, "The urge to convert experience into a group of words that are in grammatical relation to one another is the most basic ongoing impulse of my life." What does writing mean to you?
Could you read that again?
The urge to convert experience into a group of words that are in grammatical relation to one another is the most basic ongoing impulse of my life. I thought that was really wonderful. Anyone want to comment?
My standard answer for this is that it makes more sense to write something than to not write something.
I actually asked myself that, what is it, why do I do this? It's not exactly your question, but it's similar. And I don't have an answer. It puzzles me, it troubles me. Why do I do this? I just feel I kind of have to do it. It's what I do is the answer. It's what I do. And I also find great joy in doing it when I'm actually down to doing it. I find it torture during that other time when I want to be doing it, but I haven't quite got there yet, and then I think, why am I doing this? I'm old enough, I could stop, but I don't stop, and I've already started on my next novel. I'm crazy.
To be honest, I think I am scared to look back. And part of the reason I'm scared to look back probably has to do with the fact that I'm an immigrant. And I come from a very large family. And it terrifies me to look back. Even to look back 3 years, it terrifies me. You know, oh gosh, I'm almost crying, and I don't ever cry. I don't ever cry. Which is very odd. Wait, let somebody say.
Probably the easy answer that I usually give is that I'm really not any good at anything else. I mean, there weren't a lot of options. But honestly, I think I was a kid whose relationship with language was as intense and palpable as my relationship with any friend, any person. And I'm talking about almost language divorced from meaning, the musicality. I would make lists of words that I just like the sound of. I would make lists of names and categorize them. These sound like smart people names. These sound like dumb people names. These are pretty girl names. These are, you know, whatever it was. But my intimate, it's a very intimate experience for me. It's not, I guess, overtly about I want to write to change the world. It's really the moment that you are alone with the language, and since I was a poet for a long time, and just being with the words, trying to get them in the right order, that kind of like explosion that happens when you do get them in the right order. And it's a kind of magical dance, really, and something that is always part of who I am. So, I would like to be a neuroscientist because I'm really interested in the brain, but I don't think it's going to happen at this point. But I also just love the nitty-gritty of language, and I like to play with it, and that's kind of why. I think if I didn't have that, I'd be something else, possibly a neuroscientist.
This is actually easy for me. I come from an academic family, and nobody does anything except write. The other thing is, I'm trying to think what would my wife say, and she would say, well, given that this book took 5 years, why don't you write more? And honestly, it's. I know why. My dad, when I grew up, my father gave me a copy of Strunk and White, yes, this was it was sort of a. Most people think of Strunk and White as a book about how to write. It's actually a book about how to live and how to be a kind of a crusty old geezer like E.B. White, perfectly suited for 16-year-old minds, but there was nothing I could do after that, I guess. It is a book that makes the case that if you don't know how to write, you're a bad person. Again, that's sort of a Northeastern mentality, I think. My son is 4. He has no idea what's going to hit him.
Just to finish it, I don't know how that struck me just now. I guess I was remembering a poem by a friend of mine who wrote a letter from Elizabeth, and he wrote that apparently this Elizabeth, I think it's me he's talking about, always said she didn't like to look back, and I thought, good God, how did he know that? But I feel safest when I write fiction. I am safe. I can explore all kinds of things, and I know I am also exploring my life, but I feel very safe. And I also I'm just absolutely thrilled by the language, by what the language can do, and how words hit against each other. And I have my favorite writers that I read over and over again because they do this. Like John Banfield. Have any of you read John Banville, The Sea? John Banville, The Sea. It's an Irish writer who won the Man Booker. He has a new book out now. I just saw it reading. Oh, that man can write. God, I read him over and over again, just what he does with language. But it's the safe. That's what I want. I don't know why this happened.
One final thought, actually. I said before that it makes more sense to write than to not write. To expand on that slightly, if I think about what I would do if I didn't write, there's just this huge yawning emptiness, which I find quite terrifying. Some people believe in God because the thought of being an atheist is just too scary, and it's kind of like that. I mean, if I didn't take the time to do this, what would I do? I don't have an answer for that, and that's a really scary truth.
I'd just like to say one more thing, and that is that all of us up here are very lucky because our work is published. Oh, yeah. And so we get to write because we have publishers. But there are many, many people who are writers and who try endlessly to get published and can't, and they keep on writing, and they keep on writing, even though they get no material rewards, and even some of them are shamed for it. And I think those are the people that this question should be addressed to, not us.
Thank you. That was very wonderful. I want to turn this over to Linda Epstein, our Vice President of Communications and Literary Agent, to kind of field the whole question section.
I'm just going to field the questions. So what I request is that if it's a question for a specific person, just be clear who it's addressed to. And if it's just to the whole group, then we'll do that. So questions?
I'll be lazy. This is to the whole group. I'm wondering, because you spoke, all of you, so beautifully about kind of where to start and how the character comes in. Would any of you speak to the revision process? Do you sit and let things, cook for a while? Do you revise as you write? How do you do that? Because it seems to me that maybe one of the differences between getting wildly published or frequently published and not is something to do with working and working until you have a really good final draft. At least that's one of the myths that we hear about as aspiring writers.
One of the things I love about group things with writers is to hear about process. And every time I do, I hear about other people's processes. I realize that mine is wrong and should be replaced. But it's because when somebody asks me how many drafts you do, how many drafts do you do? And I'm often on with panels of writers who are like, 17. I mean, like, huge number of drafts and drafts and drafts. And I have writers, friends who say things like, I'm just going to take this summer and just bang out a draft, just get the story out there, and then I'm going to go back and have this raw material to work with. And when I write fiction the same way I wrote poetry, which is I take a sentence and I write it. So when people ask me how many drafts do you do, I would say, like, you mean of a sentence or of a paragraph, because it's so slow, and I take a word, and I don't put in placeholders, I don't write the end before the beginning, it's very plodding. It's one sentence, and then the next sentence grows out of that, and the next sentence grows out of that. I have no idea how you could work ahead, because I don't know what's going to happen in the next sentence until I've written the one. And I just polish and polish and polish until it feels right to me, and then I move on to the next sentence. And then I go back to the whole paragraph, and I listen to the music, and I do that, and then I go to the first sentence of the next paragraph. And so when I'm finished working, it's a little bit different because it's not like I then go back and revise the whole thing. It's really been going on the whole way through. And every day when I start my writing day, I go back to the last 3 pages I wrote and fine-tune and fine-tune and fine-tune and fine-tune, because I really feel like I can't move on until, at least in that moment, it feels right to me. And so then, by the time the book is finished, it's mostly tinkering that happens. Little things, little moving words, cutting things. Or my editor might say, stay with this moment longer, you're bailing out, you're parachuting out of this moment. And then I can do that, and add or subtract. But it's not a big revamping. That doesn't happen.
I think things have changed greatly since we have computers. We used to have drafts because we would have to we would write by hand, and then we would use the typewriter, and you couldn't go over and over a sentence because it was technically not possible. And nowadays, I, too, am completely stymied by the question, how many drafts? Because I, too, now that I have the prospect of a word processor, I can just keep revising as I go along. And I don't know how that would translate to drafts. I do remember that with my first novel, Memoirs of an Ex-Prom Queen, I had a schedule for myself because I knew nothing. And so I had to make it up myself. I knew no writers. So my first, I gave myself a time limit. I had, I think, 10 chapters, and I gave myself a month for each chapter, which is so ridiculous now, but that was what I thought I had to do. Or maybe I had 12 and 2, whatever it was. And then my yellow draft was the first one on that cheapest paper. And remember, you had to make all your revisions by hand in between the lines. It was impossible. Even if you left 3 lines, there wasn't enough room. And it was so much harder because you would want to revise as you went along, but you couldn't. So I would have X number of days to do the first, then X number of days to go over that chapter, then I would only allow myself then to reread the last page or 2 of that chapter and start the next one. And I was on this strict schedule. And then I had the blue, after I got out the whole draft, then I did the next one, draft, and then the next, and so on. But I have to say that I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never taken a writing course. I was a philosopher. And it happens to have been the most successful book I've ever published. I published it in 1972. It keeps getting reissued, and it's never been out of print. It has its 25th anniversary edition, its 35th anniversary edition, its 40th anniversary edition. And I sort of long for the past when that was possible. Now that isn't possible, and I just keep revising as I go along.
Sorry. I think everybody's different is part of what you're hearing here. Sentence by sentence, really? Okay. No, that's perfectly normal. No, that's the way we all do it. I write longhand because I can't type. I write first drafts the way I play electric guitar, which is poorly but with great enthusiasm. And I write very, very fast. It's pretty much the opposite. I write 10 or 12 pages in a couple of hours. And they suck, so relax. But, but they're there, And if I do that for a week, I got 100, 150 pages, and I'm halfway home. And this is good because I have a very, very short attention span. I get distracted and bored really easily. So I have to just kick it out really fast. And then my rule of thumb is that when I'm writing a first draft, just shut the editor off. The editor goes away. Just vomit it all out. But when you revise, man, you just have to be ruthless. You just have to be vicious, both on the sentence level of just making the cadences musical or whatever, but also, you know, you have this great scene. It's a really funny, witty conversation between these two great characters. Does it advance the plot? No, it's gone. Does it reveal a character in some relevant way? No, it's gone. Preferably, it should do both things at the same time. But if it doesn't do either one, it's gone. It might be the best thing you ever wrote. But if it doesn't move stuff forward, get rid of it. And you really have to be brutal. It becomes a game to see how much you can take out and still keep the story intact. So that's, I mean, if you're looking for advice, you know, when you're generating material, just be very, very generous. But when you're shaping it, you have to be brutal, in my opinion. Because, yeah, you know, if you're trying to get people to read this, if you want somebody to take the time to read it, then, you know, you have to ask yourself constantly, you know, is this relevant? Is this to the point? If it's lyrical or whatever, I don't care. Does it advance the plot?
One of my issues with revisions was that this was a book about my wife's family and my family, and comparing them and pointing out all their defects, and also it was about the place that I worked at the time. So my major concern was not being disowned. And as I wrote my revisions, I came to really appreciate the editorial guidance of my wife, who would read drafts and tell me, no way, you gotta change that. But would also frequently say, you've made it too bland, you gotta make it more real. There's no point in writing this unless it's real, and everybody will know you'll know when it's real, and that led to, you know, dozens and dozens of drafts for me, but that was the process that I was going through.
I think pretty much I agree with more or less what everyone said here. I really don't have too much more to add to that.
Hang on to the back.
Other questions?
About the computer and writing on the computer, it seems like it would also present a challenge that everything is always getting erased. You know, everything that you've written is disappearing as you're changing it. It's not like you have the piece of paper to hold on to. So it seems like it presents a different kind of challenge than the old way of writing.
So I guess the question is, what's the challenge of writing on the computer?
Well, I don't think everything gets erased. I mean, some you know, when you change the wording or the order of the clauses or the order of the sentences in a paragraph, you can work on that paragraph, and I'm similar to you in that way. It does, but then once you have that and the surrounding paragraphs and pages, and you've moved on to the next, at a certain point you save that. I'm sure each of us has an idiosyncratic method. I save things by date, or give very funny numbers and names to the various parts. And I have found through my 40 years of writing that the last version is the best. Now, it took me a long time to learn that. I still save all my early versions, and if I print out, which I do less and less, I save the printouts so that I can go back. Also, in connection with what you said, Dave, I have always on my computer a place where I put discarded scenes. I don't ever want to throw anything out until it's over. And sometimes I never look at those scenes again, but I save them. So it's just a different way of saving in my experience.
It's actually one of the things that I love about writing on the computer is that you delete it and it's gone from the universe. Like I feel like I do save scenes. If it's whole chunks, like what you're talking about, where it's this wonderful conversation and you like it so much, and mostly it's just because I can't bear to totally part with it. It often doesn't come back or get recycled in any way. But on the level of the sentence and in writing, I am almost phobic about writing something that feels wrong to me. And so when I've found that it's wrong, there's a near panic, and I just delete it, and then it's gone, and it's like soul saving. I mean, I feel like it doesn't exist anymore. And I see these like we have, I mean, I wonder what happens to textual criticism and all this, because you look at these drafts of these, these poets and all the changes and all, everything, and they've got all the versions, and they can compare them, and, Whitman and all of his Leaves of Grass over and over. And I'm so glad that they will never do that with ever with my work, because I just want it to be dead and gone and dust and blown into the cosmos. Yeah, okay.
Well, my first 4 novels I wrote by hand because I didn't know how to type. And one of my students said, this won't happen. So I went to Bosse's, the Bosse's thing. My fingers just going like this. So I actually don't know where any of the letters are on the keyboard, because I learned touch typing. So the minute I look down at the letters, I don't know what's going. Now, believe me, I never thought this was ever possible. I don't know how it happened, but that's what I do. And I think I love it. I love the computer. I love it for that. That sometimes what I find myself doing is pulling out a whole section. I sort of do, not quite like that, but I know when it's right, and I know when it's wrong. And I think that's, to answer your question, I think that's what an emerging new writer has to be honest, to have that kind of integrity. You do know when that sentence is wrong, and you do know when that paragraph is wrong, and you have to be willing to scrap it and try again. Yeah.
We're going to actually have to finish up right now because we want to have time to mingle. So if you want to ask more questions, you can do that.
I want to thank all of you. This was really wonderful. Thank you. Well.